Let's get started. First of all, a word to the people online. You did not miss something. We missed something. We weren't here last week. I got a call today wondering what happened to the Revelation teaching. So that's all on us and not on any of you people online. You know, I got a call, it seems like it happens every time these days I drive down here. I got a call from someone I did not know from the East Coast who's listening to the podcast. I think they'll start listening to Revelation, but listening to the podcast, and I think she said, I want to try to make the meet and greet the first Saturday in August up in northern Indiana as well. But in talking with her, she said, however, it kind of depends on with all that's going on in the world, and she mentioned Israel and Iran and what President Trump decides to do. She said, I'll try to make it, but we don't know what's going to happen between now and then. And I said, no, we don't. I think he had his press secretary did deliver a message from him to the country today, and he said he'd make a decision within the next 2 weeks. And a lot can happen in the next 2 weeks of what he is going to do concerning Iran. And that depends on what Israel does and what Iran does. But anyway, all that to say this, she said, I also listened to another podcast, and it's a very well-known one. I'm not going to mention it publicly, but it's a very well-known one. And she said, they're telling us to flee to the mountains. Don't even go back home to grab your clothes, but to just flee to the mountains because we're in the end times. And she said, what do you think about that? And I was so glad she asked, because I don't normally, if they don't ask my opinion, I don't offer it. And I said, well, we are definitely living in the last days. According to the writer of Hebrews, the first couple of verses, he said, in previous times, God spake to our fathers by the prophets, but now in these last days, he's spoken unto us by his Son. So I said, we're living in the last days. But I think it's really important before we do something that a verse says that we find out the context of that passage. And I said, I think the context of that passage, which is in Matthew 24 and Mark 13 and Luke 21, puts it during the 7-year tribulation period. We just have to be careful because people will steal your money and steal your sanity if you let them. And, just in thinking about that, we just have to really cherish God's word and a real honest attempt and effort, which I think we always make, to understand what the scriptures are saying. It's our only hope. It's our only source. Otherwise, we're just listening to whatever voice says, flee, I said, well, which voice, who is going to say that? And how do we know that we can trust them if they tell us to flee? And when do we flee? How do we know if someone just on their YouTube channel says, let's everyone flee? So they've been doing that for 100 years. So it just brings us back to the importance of solidly having a foundation on Scripture. We just started last week with Revelation 7, and I didn't even wait to get to the punchline. I just wanted to come through the front door and not the back door or a window and say what I thought about this first vision, and that is particularly about the number that I think it's literal, 144,000, 12,000 from the 12 tribes, and I think that's literal as well. So we just got that out of the way, although there is a lot more we're going to discuss and a lot more I want to say about that. I don't see anything in the passage that would have ever told me it was anything but that. I think we have to bring that to the passage and then say, oh, I think there must be some mysterious symbol here. But have you noticed this? Those who have been following what we're studying in Revelation, have you noticed this? Hopefully you have. How did we end chapter 6? We ended chapter 6 with the end of the sixth seal. And the last two chapters, 5 and 6, have been about the seals. The scroll that's sealed with 7, and we got through 6. In chapter 6, where's number 7? Where did that go? We got through 6 of them, and they were just boom, 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 right in order. the four horsemen of the apocalypse, then the cry of the martyrs, then the sun, the moon, and the stars. And we would open chapter 7, verse 1, and we would think we would read, and when he broke the seventh seal. But we don't read that, do we? Look over in chapter 8 and verse 1. And when he had opened the seventh seal. So, that should tell you, you need to ask yourself a question, what do we have on our hands? We've been going these seals in order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And now we go to chapter 8 before we get to the seventh seal. So with chapter 7 sandwiched between the two, we should be asking, what do we have on our hands? You know, we want to always look at the text, but always stand back and look at the big picture and say, what are we dealing with here? You know, what are we dealing with? It never ceases to amaze me how people can get so wrapped up in what it is they want to find. Everyone, by the way, about this first vision, what everybody wants to know is where's the tribe of Dan? That's what everybody wants to know. And that is a question that needs to be raised and see if you can answer it. But there are so many other things here besides just that. And so, as I've said before, people will run to the book of Revelation looking for particular things and never say, but wait a minute, let me deal with, why do I have all of chapter 7 between the two? So what this is called is an intercalation, which is a word that's used in a lot of different sciences. I think it's in geology, it's in chemistry, it's in biochemistry, it's definitely in literature, it's in writing like this. And what an intercalation is you have opened something or parted something and stuck something in there. So it's like in geology, it's something between two layers of rock. And so in writing or in literature, it's the insertion of something into the sequence of events. That's exactly what this is. It's an intercalation. It's the insertion of two visions into the order of events. Now, so then we would ask ourselves, I can see that it's been inserted because it's like the sixth and seventh seal have been pried apart and something stuck in there. Is it put in chronological order? Well, probably not, because if it was in chronological order, it wouldn't be an intercalation. It would just be a continuation of what he was already talking about in chapter 6. And just for your knowledge, the Bible is full of these insertions. You could call them a parenthesis. You could call them an interlude. It is full of these. It's just the way that the biblical writers often wrote, not in a Western, strictly chronological way, but more theological or thematic, following certain themes. So when you have an insertion like this, sometimes it's an insertion of something that's not even related on first glance. I'm going to spend just a few minutes talking about this because before we're done tonight, I think you'll see this is a key, this is an important key to understanding chapter 7. It's, you know, I'm back to one of my favorite topics, and that's the literary structure. And you can't blame this on John. John is just basically an amanuensis. He is writing the visions in the order they were given to him. It's not like Matthew sitting down years after the events of the life of Christ, and then he writes his gospel. He's got chapter 1 and chapter 2. That's Matthew organizing that under the superintendence of the Holy Spirit. But it's still Matthew doing that. It's a little bit different here in the book of Revelation because John, he's not later, as far as we know, he's not later sitting down and saying, I'm going to just write this in whatever order I want to. I think he's written it down in the order in which he saw it, the order in which it was given, which then tells us what? This is where God wanted what we call chapter 7, these two visions, this is where God wanted that to be. And this isn't the only place in the book that it happens. Look over it's going to happen again real soon. And so what we say now is going to apply later. When we get into chapter 8, we're into the 7 trumpets. Chapter 8 has the first 4. Chapter 9 has the next 2. Verses 13 through 21 of chapter 9 has the 6th seal. I'm sorry, I'm still on seals. The 6th trumpet. Where's the 7th?
Chapter 10.
It's actually not until halfway through chapter 11. Look at 11:14. The second woe is past, the third woe cometh quickly, and the 7th angel sounded. There's the 7th trumpet. Of the 7 trumpets, way back earlier in chapter 8, we have 4 and 8, 2 and 9, none in 10, none in the first half of 11. The 7th one is in the second half of chapter 11. We have another intercalation, all of chapter 10, the first half of chapter 11. And of course, we will obviously deal with that in some detail whenever we get there. So think of it as, this is really important to understand the literary structure. It's going to give you all kinds of understanding about this chapter. In literature, it'd be like a parenthesis. You're telling a story, and then you do this, and you do it in writing, but you do it in talking too. My wife is an expert on this. She's telling a story, and I want her to tell the whole story from start to finish, but then she adds a parenthetical statement, and so that's it's in parentheses, and it might not even be related. It's just something she said over here, a key word triggered a thought, is normally what happens. And so you make this parenthetical statement. She's just telling a story, but she used the word fish, and she said, oh yeah, by the way, those fish. And then she goes and talks about something that's not related, but it was, because it's still talking about fish. To think of it another way, if you thought of it in the context of a live play on a stage, you have Act 1 and Act 2 and Act 3 and Act 4, but between Act 3 and Act 4, now this isn't a direct parallel because as you're watching a play, everything is happening in order. But part of this will help you understand. Between 3 and 4, what happens? They close the curtains, and it's called an intermission. That's what chapter 7 is very similar to. It's an intermission. Not in chronological order as in a play, but it's a pause, it's a parenthesis, it's an intermission. And when those curtains are closed, what's going on? Well, the actors and actresses are changing their clothes, getting ready for the next scene. The stage hands are moving props around and relocating tables and chairs, getting ready, and then the curtain opens back up. So the interesting thing here with John and the Holy Spirit in chapter 7 is what's happening, as it were, behind the curtains is in full view. He is explaining to us in full detail what is happening behind the curtains. And because we know from the 6th seal really being the end of the tribulation period, and therefore recapitulation happens in the book. There is fast forward and there is rewind. Because we know that, we should be looking for where that might happen, where he might have skipped forward or where he might skip backwards. So knowing what we know, then I would have to say there's got to be a reason for this intercalation. Now, whether we can determine what it is another matter, but there's got to be a reason for it because it's not done in order. And there is this whole chapter with 2 visions just sandwiched in between. There has to be a reason. Hopefully it's discernible, but we'll see. Look at verse 1 and verse 9. Let me just try to clear up something and help work our way through. Look at because we have 2 visions, 1 through 8 and 9 through 17. How does verse 1 start? And after these things I saw. And how does verse 9 start? And after this I beheld, and lo. Both of the visions start with, and it's true in the Greek New Testament as well, with the word after. However, I think it's very misleading. Let me rephrase that. It's not misleading. A person who's not carefully reading can be easily misled simply because he's not carefully reading. John does not say, or does not mean, he doesn't say it for sure, and he doesn't even mean it. After the events that I've just described happened, that's the sixth seal, these will be the next events that will happen. That's not what he said. Now, if you're reading hurriedly, you might think that because it said, and after these things. But he did not say, after those things that I just described happened, after they happened, the next things that happened are these things, which would be chapter 7. No, that's not what he means, and that's not what he said. What he said is, after I saw those things, which is the end of chapter 6, after I saw those things, the next thing that I saw was what I'm going to write about right now.
Which
is all the difference in the world.
Which may chronologically happen before the things he saw at the end of chapter 6.
Could very well.
But you can't interpret the chronology based on the verse 1 of chapter 7, is what you're saying.
Yes. What I'm saying is he did not say that these events follow in chronological order of time. What he is saying is it followed in the time that I saw it. Right. I was given this vision of the sixth seal, and the next thing I saw, the next vision I was given, was this vision of the 5 angels and the 144,000. And because we know, now here's how you figure out the chronology on your own, because we know the sixth seal is the end of the tribulation. Matthew 24:29 is clear. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be dark, the moon will not give its light, and the stars of heaven will fall, and the Son of Man will return. And that is the sixth seal. We already know the chronology of that. So if that's at the end of the tribulation, there's no way chapter 7 can happen after that. Right. Chapter 7 had to have happened before that. Sometime during it, and sometime before the sixth seal.
Well, at least verses 1 through 8. Now,
at least that.
Now verses 9 through 17, you look at what's happening in the context, and they're all standing before the throne, and it said these have come out of the tribulation. Now that could have happened at the very,
What he is seeing could be a view of something that's at the end of the tribulation, because he does say that, but that's still
but
for...
verses 1 through 8, yeah, we'll stay with that, yeah.
And also, what the first 3 verses of chapter 7 are talking about, we keep hearing or reading, hold the winds back so they don't blow, so that no damage is done to the earth and the trees and the sea. And when we get over to the first 2 trumpets blown, that's exactly what's going to be hurt. Will be the earth and the trees and the sea. So that tells us some of the chronology as well. I know it might sound a little technical, but I'm telling you, when you know these things, it just makes the book of Revelation so much easier to interpret. You're not all confused, and that's where most people are. They're very confused about what happens when. And if they see a word after, if they're not careful, they just assume that everything in chapter 7 chronologically follows everything in chapter 6, but it simply can't. All right. With that being said, that was my first introduction to the fact that this is an interlude, this is a parenthesis, and it actually precedes the sixth seal, and we don't know how much earlier it goes back. So John and the angel giving him this have interrupted the narrative, and they're simply backtracking. And so that brings us to maybe the most important question about this being an interlude, and that is the question, why? What's the purpose of this? Because that's going to tell us a whole lot.
Why did God give him the vision in that order?
In this order.
It's not
It's not chronological, that's 100% certain. So why is this vision the next vision? It's so important. He's got a whole entire chapter that actually has 2 visions in it. Why is it placed right here? Well, I can think of at least 4 reasons that are rather obvious, and there may be more that I haven't thought of, or you can think of more that I can't think of, but I can think of 4. The first of these being, I think, the most important one, but then it kind of leads into the next one and the next one as well. How did we end chapter 6? What does chapter 6 end with? I told you before that Acts 21 ends with a comma and Revelation 6 ends with a question mark. Right? Who can abide the day of their wrath? You know, their wrath is fear. It's a plural pronoun. The great day of their wrath has come, and who shall be able to stand? And you know, I gave you, I think, some earlier verses, but that is clearly based on, you don't have to turn to these, you can if you want to, but a few in the Old Testament. I'll look at one of these. Joel 2:11, also talking about the day of the Lord. Joel 2:11, the minor prophet Joel, the Lord shall utter his voice before his army, for his camp is very great, for he is strong that executeth his word. For the day of the Lord, and we know what kind of day it is a day of wrath. We read that over and over and over and over in the Old Testament. The day of the Lord is a day of wrath. For the day of the Lord is great and very terrible, and who can abide it? Old Testament prophets ask the same thing that is asked by John, the end of chapter 6. It's also asked by Nahum in chapter 1 and verse 6 of his prophecy. And then if you want to look at, Nahum's a little hard to find. I won't make you look for that. But if you look at Malachi, that's the last book in the Old Testament. That's easy to find. Malachi in chapter 3, first couple of verses, we're going to find the same thing here, where we read, Behold, I will send my messenger, and he shall prepare the way before me. This is all very interesting material. The Lord whom ye seek shall suddenly come to his temple, even the messenger of the covenant, whom ye delight in. Behold, he shall come, saith the Lord of hosts. So it's obviously talking about a coming of the Lord, the messenger of the covenant. But who may abide the day of his coming? And who shall stand when he appeareth? For he's like a refiner's fire and a fuller's soap. Same question being asked back then. So when I was a few weeks ago here and we were teaching and talking about Revelation chapter 6 and verse 17, and it ends with this fearful, frightening question, the great day of their wrath is come, and who shall be able to stand? What I told you then is we should all say in unison, because this is the kind of expected answer, no one. Who can stand? That is obviously the intended answer to this rhetorical question. It's the same answer anticipated in Joel and the same one in Malachi. Who shall be able to stand on that day that was just described in such terrible and fearful language as the sixth seal was? Who can live through that? Who can survive that? The answer would be no one. But, John has a big surprise for us. You know, there's an Old Testament passage in one of the minor prophets that said, in wrath, remember mercy. And that theme is just throughout Revelation. You'll see wrath, then you'll see mercy. And then you'll see wrath, and then you'll see mercy. It's a very, very dark time. As I said, most of the references to Yom Yahweh, 95% of them say it's a day of fear, dread, darkness, death, wrath, anger, clouds, gloominess, thick darkness. The vast majority of references say it is a terrifically terrible time. But and most of Revelation in these let's say chapters 6 through 19 that deal with the tribulation period, most of the writing in those chapters is pretty bad. Most of it is pretty terrible. But every now and then you go, oh, I see something good happening. I see saints alive. I see good people and good things happening. It's not often. But here's a big one that maybe doesn't start the tribulation period, but it's early in God's narrative of this. So when we would say in response to who will be able to stand, no one, John's got a surprise. Actually, it's true that no one in their own strength and by their own cunning and wiles and craftiness and resourcefulness could stand. No, but with God, all things are possible. What about if God were to seal someone and protect them? Then do you think they could stand? Absolutely. So I think that chapter 6 leaves us with this, it's a bad feeling, with this rhetorical question, who will be able to stand? And we all drop our heads and say, no one. And then we open up chapter 7 and we go, oh, wait a minute. I see 144,000 that'll be able to stand. And look, if based on today's population, 8 billion, if these events happen in our lifetime, we saw under the fourth seal that a quarter of them would die? A quarter of them would die? 2 billion of them would die? Does that mean everyone will die? No. And we know believers will die. That's the fifth seal. But will all believers die? No. Not all believers will. So he says, who can stand? And we would think no one. And John says, but wait a minute, here are 144,000 that will stand or survive. Then we could hypothesize if 144,000 could live and could stand, could maybe more. Well, what does 1 Thessalonians 4 talk about? Those of us who are alive and remain under the coming of the Lord will still be alive.
There have to be some people, otherwise that verse doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
It's kind of like in the beginning of the seals, like they searched far and wide and they couldn't find anybody who's going to be able to open it. And they're like, aha, we have to. It's kind of the same structure like that.
That is a great point. This is just a wonderfully given and written book, as every book in the Bible is. When you study them in detail, you see that author, both God the Holy Spirit and the human author, take us on this remarkable journey. And you're exactly right. In chapter 5, there was all of this wailing and bemoaning by John because they had searched everywhere and couldn't find anyone. And so what do? We hang our heads and say, I guess everything's all toast. Everything's over. Oh, no, a surprise. There is one worthy to open. So here we're going down this same roller coaster track. Sometimes we're down and sometimes we're up. Where we thought no one would be able to stand, I think that the first and major reason or purpose for this being given is to let us know that there are people that are going to be able to stand. And he just gives us a representative group of them, and that's 144,000. A second reason, I think, why this is here. In other words, a purpose for this as an intermission or as an interlude. And it just leads from the first purpose, and that is to show us the importance of the nation of Israel. So through answering that rhetorical question, who can stand? Through answering that question, and he could have said, well, there'll be some Christian people who survive to the end, because that's what Paul says in 1 Thessalonians 4. Rather than that, in answering the question, who can stand, he brings in a particular group of people who will stand, and that would be the 144,000 of chapter 7. Here's a passage we haven't looked at. If you'll turn over to Daniel chapter 9. We have not spent much time in Daniel at all. Daniel 9 is, the critical chapter for so much of this, and it's a difficult chapter to interpret, and there is so much in it, but it is the only place in the Bible that gives us a time period of the tribulation. And we're not even getting into that at all tonight. All I want to show you is verse, maybe a couple of verses, but verse 24. And I don't want to give too much of the context. You can read it yourself. Daniel's prophecy is somewhat difficult to understand, but just take this for what it's worth. So here in Daniel chapter 9 and verse 24, we have Daniel's so-called 70 weeks. It's not really weeks, it's anyway, we'll talk about that some other time. It's just a plural of 77s. And we find out that, and he'll go on in the next few verses to break that period down, and then you end up with 1 week, which is really 1 period of 7 years, and that's later here in the chapter. The only point I'm trying to make here is that the tribulation period is so much about the nation of Israel. And so here in this context, it says 77s are determined upon your people. 70 means even that last one, which is the tribulation period, which is the book of Revelation. That's not only determined on the world, the heathen, it is determined on your people and on the holy city, Jerusalem. And then it gives a list of reasons: to finish a transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. And then down in verse 27, and we'll look at all of these verses in much more detail when we get to where they tie in to our study in Revelation. Then we read, he, and that's the prince that shall come, he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 period of 7, for a week. And in the midst of the week, or in the midst of this 7-year period, he will cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations, he shall make it desolate. A lot of big, big words. Jesus refers to that specifically in Matthew 24:15, saying that was spoken by Daniel the prophet when the abomination that maketh desolate happens. He's referring to this verse, to Daniel 9:27. So again, my point in saying this is we have Jewish people, we have Israelites, we have people from the 12 tribes in Revelation chapter 7 in that first vision. And so Israel is so important in the tribulation period, and they haven't been mentioned up until now. Even though, as I showed you last week, we saw all these connections with the symbolism, the imagery, the text. Revelation's an Old Testament book. It's all about the Old Testament. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. It's not just about the church and the rapture of the church. It is about everything that the Old Testament predicted would be fulfilled. Revelation is just giving us more information about that. And also I can give you this verse, Jeremiah 30 and verse 7, calls this period the time of Jacob's trouble. Jeremiah 30 and verse 7 said, alas, that day is great, so that none is like it. It is even the time of Jacob's trouble, but he will be saved out of it. That's a famous, important verse you should never forget, Jeremiah 30 and verse 7. So that's a second reason or purpose for the interlude. A third one, if you just think about it, you'd come up with these and maybe some more. He has been talking about, in the last 2 chapters, seals. He has been talking about seals. Oh, and what did you say? In Habakkuk 3:2 was, in wrath, remember mercy. All right, somebody found the verse for me. Habakkuk 3:2, in wrath, remember mercy. He has been talking in the last few chapters about what? So it's a thematic reason also. He's been talking about seals. And what are these people going to have on their forehead? The seal of the living God. So the biblical authors do this all the time. If we write a book, we are in the Western mindset, we write as an historian, and we document everything in chronological order. The biblical authors, the prophets, Moses, the writers even of the New Testament, the biblical authors are what we call historiographers, who don't necessarily follow a chronological timeline as much as a theological timeline or a thematic timeline. They're following certain themes. They get on a theme, they finish that, then their next chapter might actually revert to an earlier period in time. So he's been talking about seals. That's the word, and especially in chapter 6. And so while we're on the subject of seal, not that those seals are in any way related to this seal. I'm not saying there's a connection between the seal on their head and the 6 seals open. I'm just saying he's talking about seals, so he might as well go ahead and bring this into play right now. And then a fourth and final reason, and we'll move on.
Here's your logic then, because you would say, well, why couldn't he then just talk about this after he talks about the 7th seal? Why not get all the seals out of the way and then talk about these seals? And you'll say, well, because the 7th seal, nothing really happens. That just leads us into the first trumpet, and that's why it wouldn't make sense to do it after.
Exactly.
It would have to come before the 7th seal, but after the first 6.
Yeah. 7th seal is unusual because
there's no judgment.
the only thing it does is prepare us for the trumpets.
You read the first few verses of chapter 8.
And then a fourth reason for this is maybe in anticipation of another kind of mark that's going to come up later in the book that's going to be placed on other people. So I just see a variety of reasons, but the primary reason is to answer that question, who will be able to stand, and to introduce us to the importance of the nation of Israel. But you know, by the time we get to chapter 13, there is another sinister figure in this book who will have his own mark that he puts on his people. So it's very interesting that before we get to him and it, we first of all have the living God and the seal of the living God put on the servants of the living God. That, what I've said so far in the first half hour or so tonight, makes chapter 7 so much more understandable to me, and I hope so to you as well. Okay, and we're going to get through the first couple of verses. You just watch and see, hopefully. So here's just, I'm not going to outline the chapter in any other way than the way it already is. We have 2 visions. We have 2 visions. But it's kind of interesting when you put these visions side by side and look at similarities and differences. Vision 1, verses 1 to 8, is something John sees on earth. Vision 2, something John sees in heaven. Vision 1, you have a group of important figures, 5 angels, and then you have a small collection of people, 144,000. Small in comparison with the second vision. In the second vision, you have 1 elder and a vast group of people. So there are contrasts that are very notable between these 2 visions. 1 on earth, 1 in heaven. 1 with 5 angels as the guiding figures. The second with 1 of the 24 elders as the guiding figure. And then the first vision is a small group of people, relatively speaking. The second vision is an innumerable company of people. One final thing, and then we're going to jump into verse 1. Presumably, see if you do not agree, you don't have to agree with me. Presumably, these visions are in some way related, as are the groups of people in them. I mean, there's no way to prove that's the case here. What I was saying was, presumably, these visions are related, and the groups are related. This is a really interesting question that we're going to get to later on, but would you presume that, or would you say, oh, definitely not? It's hard to say, but I would be more likely to assume they are related than that they are not related. I think it's better than a 50-50 chance that they are related, the visions, and that the people in them are related. Although, as we're going to see later, unfortunately, the text does not make that explicit. So we just have to think, okay, I understand this as an intermission or an interlude, and I've got two visions. And I've just kind of categorized those for you. You've got the 5 beings and the one, the small group, the big group, one on earth, one in heaven. So what's going on here? Why? We know why we have this here. We know at least with the 144,000, we know we have them. Why is this second vision dragged in and piggybacks on the back of the other one? What's going on with that? Well, we'll get to that later on. Let's begin looking at, with the time we have left, see how far we get through these first few verses. Let me just set the scene here. So John has retraced his steps to some point earlier in the tribulation, and he has a vision of 5 angels, 4 and then 1. It's a vision about them and what he hears them saying and what their responsibilities are. It's interesting that it never says he saw the 144,000. It never says anything about them in relation to John except that he heard the number. That's all it says to us. He heard the number. It never says that he saw them. What he did see is, look at verse 1. After these things I saw 4 angels standing on the 4 corners, holding back the 4 winds. So we've got 4 angels standing on the 4 corners of the earth, holding back the 4 winds so that they wouldn't blow. We don't know why yet. What's wrong with the wind blowing? We don't know the answer to that yet, but we're going to find out very soon. And then in the second verse, we see now a 5th angel who comes from the east. He has with him the seal of the living God, and then he says what he says. So look, in verse 1, we're not going to spend any time where all the commentators spend so much time trying to say John's not talking about a flat earth theory. Well, of course he's not. We're not even going to spend our valuable time saying he's not teaching a flat earth. It's just a popular reference that has always been used, that will always be used, because we think of 4 directions and 4 points on the compass. What John sees from heaven as he looks down is he sees the 4 directions, and he sees an angel standing on all 4. Now, it's even possible, we don't know this, it might not have been due north, south, east, west. It could be diagonal. We don't even know that. And the only reason I mention the diagonal is in the Old Testament prophets, it's the diagonal southeast wind that they call the sirocco. That was the devastating one that came off of the Arabian desert that would wreak havoc in the land of Israel. Again, we don't know whether it's diagonal or whether it is at a right angle, but they are restraining or holding back the winds that would come from that direction so they don't blow, and for a moment anyway, we don't know why. Then in verse 2, he said, I saw another angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God, and then he said something to the first 4. Let's look for a moment at that direction, that he came from the eastern horizon. Is that significant? I would say probably so. What is the significance? Well, one good guess, if you just want to, I don't want to spend the time reading these, but write down the passages. It's in Ezekiel's prophecy in chapter 11 and verse 1, and then in chapters 22 and in verses 22 to 23 of Ezekiel 11, Ezekiel has a vision of the glory of God leaving the temple, leaving Jerusalem, and going out the eastern gate or the eastern side. It's very explicit in Ezekiel. That's the fall of the city and the fall of the temple, and the Jews go into captivity in 586 BC at that time, and God's glory has left going to the east. Then when you turn to Ezekiel 43, verses 1 to 6, we see the glory of God returning to the millennial temple, which is detailed in chapters 40 to 48, these last 9 chapters of Ezekiel, returning from the east. So is this angel coming from the east in some anticipation of what is yet to happen? No one can say. But that he's coming from the east probably has some significance. The second thing we read about him is he has the seal of the living God in his hand. We're going to talk about that next week, so let me skip that for right now. And then he cries with a loud voice to the 4 angels that John saw first, "Hurt not the earth, neither the sea, nor the trees." So one thing we can glean from this is that this particular 5th angel obviously had authority, did he not, over the other 4? Because he issues a command and it's their responsibility to obey. So there is so much that we could parenthetically say or digress on, which we won't, about this incredible spirit world. The world of good spirits called angels and the world of evil spirits, some of whom are called demons. The Bible has a lot to say about the spirit world, but listen to my conclusion of that sentence without revealing much. It has a lot to say. The Old Testament is full of angels. The New Testament is full of both angels and demons, and Revelation is especially full of angels and demons. The Bible talks about angels and demons a lot. They're all over Scripture. Talks about them a lot. Doesn't reveal a whole lot of information. We just see them in certain circumstances. So we see 4 of them here holding back wind, and we see a 5th one that must rank somehow over them. Don't forget, Michael in the Bible is called an archangel, is he not? That stresses hierarchy. If you are an archangel, the chief one, the top one, then that is expressing hierarchy. And the same is true in the demonic realm. In Ephesians 6, Paul talks about how we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but he gives a ranking. But we wrestle against principalities, powers, the rulers of the darkness of this world, and wicked spirits in heavenly places. That's in Ephesians 6:12. On one occasion, a parent brought to Jesus a child of his and said, "I wanted your apostles, your disciples, to cast this demon out." And in Matthew 10:1, Jesus had gave his 12 power over demons, over all sicknesses, over all disease. He said you can cast demons out, you can heal all disease, all sickness. It's in Matthew 10:1. And yet they failed. And so after Jesus delivered the person of the evil spirit, the disciples came and said, "Why couldn't we cast him out?" And Jesus said, "This kind cometh not out but by prayer and fasting." This must be a stronger demon. Stronger than the ones that you've been casting out that you didn't have any problem casting out. So as you can tell, this whole topic could just go on and on and on with angelology and demonology, which we will not spend the time at all doing tonight or anywhere in this class. I simply wanted to point out, by virtue of the fact that the 5th angel has authority to command obedience from the other 4, there is some type of ranking or hierarchy when it comes to both good spirits and bad spirits.
Wasn't that what happened in Daniel, Prince of Persia?
There's another great example. So in Daniel chapter 9, as this man has remembered, Gabriel is trying to get through to answer Daniel's prayer. And he said, "It took me 21 days and I'm still not through because I'm wrestling with the Prince of Persia." Well, if it was Gabriel, an angel, wrestling with a human being, he would have killed him in 5 seconds. So he said, I had to wait for Michael to come and give me some aid. So he needed a more powerful angel, or at least another angel, to come and help him war. So yeah, it's just throughout the Bible. It is, don't ever forget this statement. The Bible talks a lot about them, without giving us a whole lot of information. And I think the reason why it doesn't give us a lot of information is human beings just want to worship whatever they can see. If we could figure that all out, we'd never pray to God. We'd just pray to whatever angel we thought was closest to us. The angels are there. The writer of Hebrews said, let brotherly love continue. Be not forgetful to entertain strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares. Hebrews 13:2. They are around us. If you look at Jesus' life and from his birth to his death, there is a flurry of angelic activity. You know, from the dreams being given to Joseph, go ahead and marry this woman. Now Herod is going to kill him, flee. Now we're in Egypt, Herod's dead, now you can go back. I mean, there is a flurry of activity. But what is so beautiful about the Bible is that it does not give us all of this systematically broken down. So we know that Gabriel's over here and Michael's there and John is here and this angel is there, Raphael is over here, and he will do this for me if I talk to him, and he will do. That's not the way. We take all of our prayers to God. And even here in this book, when John himself gets so caught up in some of the things he sees, he falls down and almost worships an angel. And the angel says, don't worship me, but worship God. John is just caught up in everything going on. And we'll see that later in the book. Did you have a question or comment?
Is this a fair statement that in the totality of what the Bible says about the spirit world, the conclusion we're left with is that there are more questions than answers?
Oh, yes. Yeah, more questions than answers. But so much given to us that at least it is meant to give the believer some comfort. The writer of Hebrews in chapter 1 tells us the angels are ministering spirits sent forth to minister to those who are heirs of salvation. That is at least part of their function. Hebrews 1, they are ministering spirits sent forth to minister to heirs of salvation. What are they doing right here in chapter 7? But they are protecting God's people. This powerful angel is telling the 4 subservient ones, hold back the wind, do what I tell you until, I have a goal in mind, until we can seal the servants of our God in their forehead with this seal. So that right there, they're performing their mission and function. And I do not doubt at all that God's angels are around us. But it's not something that people need to be preoccupied with, looking and thinking and wondering. That's all up to God. Where the angels are and how they aid us, we always take our prayers directly to Him. And whenever we are rescued, no doubt it's by the hand of an angel. No doubt it is by the hand of an angel. But we don't thank the angel. He would be the first to say, give all your thanks and glory to God. A few more things here, folks. 3 times in these first 3 verses, we keep seeing this refrain, hold back the winds. Hold back the winds. And we don't know, what does that mean? I mean, wind is not a bad thing. Well, wind is not a bad thing as long as you have a Seals and Croft summer breeze, but we're talking about major wind. He says 3 times, hold back the wind. But by the time we get to verse 3, we understand what the hold back means. It means so that they are not hurt. Hold back the winds so that they are not hurt. Let go of the wind so that things will be hurt. And when you look at the first couple of trumpets, we're going to see when and where the winds do begin to blow. And here are just some Old Testament passages you could reference. Daniel 7, 1-3, where we see wind in this context is often seen as some kind of destructive element. Hosea 13:15 and Jeremiah 49:36. Another comment or two about these angels. These angels, these 4 right now, we know the 5th one is strong, and we know he has authority because he commands and receives obedience from the 4. These four angels, one standing on all 4 horizons or all 4 diagonal corners. Let's just make it the horizons because that's easier to remember. one standing on the east and the west and the north and the south. These angels are mighty. They are the climate control. They stop the wind from blowing. He says, hold the four winds so that the wind will not blow on the earth, on the sea, or on any tree. Says it again in verse 3, and then in abbreviated form. He doesn't mention the trees, just the earth and the sea in verse 2, just an abbreviation, because he's mentioned all three in verses 1 and 3. These are probably, here's where I'm going with this, where we just came from a few moments ago. There probably are four angels that are probably in charge of the wind. John saw those four positioned. It's that fifth one that came from somewhere else. The first four were already there. He looked down and he said, I saw four angels standing on the four corners of the earth holding back the four winds. They're probably there all along, and they are probably in charge of the wind. And you know what? Let me just show you, because you say, oh, that kind of sounds a little bizarre. It is a little bizarre. I think there are a lot of things about angels and demons that to our mind would be very bizarre. But here in this same book, look at chapter 14 and verse 18. There is an angel in charge of fire. He is the angel of fire. Revelation 14:18. And another angel came out from the altar who had power over fire. You see what I mean? Where there's a lot to say about the spirit world without revealing very much. And look at chapter 16 and verse 5. Here's another angel. I heard the angel of the waters say, Thou art righteous, O Lord, which art and wast and shalt be, because thou hast judged thus. So it's interesting. You know, there's not much I can say because I've never met these angels and I don't know much about them. But angels that hold the wind, an angel or angels that are in charge of fire, and an angel or angels that are in charge of water.
But, like I said earlier, there's more questions than answers.
Yes.
We don't know in verse 18 of chapter 14 that you just referenced about this angel who came out, which had power over fire. If he is always and has always been the angel having power over fire, or at this particular moment in time, he was given special power over fire.
No, we don't.
Seeming to imply that the former is true, that there's these angels.
We don't know.
We don't know, right?
I just think that God operates through his angels, that God is on his throne and he operates through his angels. And at least here in chapter 7, we know rather than God just preventing the wind, he's got an angel that's positioned. Are they always there holding the wind back? And in chapter 16, it says the angel of the waters. I mean, it's just an interesting phrase. But as I said earlier, yes, it leaves a lot of questions. Gives us a lot of references to them without information, because all that does is satisfy curiosity, which does no good at all.
Is John 7, is that a real angel or is it?
What's that?
That wasn't in the manuscripts originally.
What's that?
The angel that came down and troubled the water, that's not in the original manuscripts.
Oh, yeah, that's very questionable.
That's
questionable in John's Gospel.
That's one of those big variants in textual criticism, right?
Yes, you remember that.
Not in a lot of the really good manuscripts.
I like Cameron Snake.
Let me see if I can finish up here with, I don't know, the first half of verse 3, and we would have gotten through 1, 2, and 3a, where he says, hurt not. So he said, prevent the wind from blowing, because I don't want it to hurt the earth, the trees, or the sea. It's probably both literal and symbolic. I mean, we know that it's a literal wind because the wind blows over in chapter 8, verse 5, verse 7, verse 8, verse 9, verse 10. We know the wind really is blowing. We know symbolically, as those verses that we did not look up that I gave you here a few moments ago from the Old Testament show, that wind is often used as a symbolism of a destructive force. The wind could be an army of of the enemy coming in, and it comes in like a wind. So it is often used as a destructive force. So what I want you to picture is unlike anything that the globe has ever seen. And that is perfect calm. It's perfectly calm and perfectly still. This is an incredible event that's going to happen. It's a literal event, just like everything else in Revelation. It's a real event that's really going to happen. This is a period of respite at some time during the tribulation. You know, the tribulation is a 7-year period. That's a lot of months, a lot of weeks, a lot of days. We tend to crunch that down so small and just think everything is just rapid, rapid, rapid. We don't know how long each of these events occur. The first seal being broken and the second and the third. We don't know. We don't know how long each of these things occur. But 7 years, that is a lot of time. You have enough time in there to have some period of time where there is calm. And we don't know how long that period will be. But there is a moment of calm where people can be about their business. There's no judgment happening. There's nothing happening at this time, presumably. Again, there's only so much we can say, and then we go beyond Scripture to try to fill in details. But I do think that there is this period of calm. The chaos of the tribulation is briefly put on hold, and it's done for one particular reason, and that is so that we can get these 144,000. We're going to talk a lot more about them in future messages. So we can, this is the big verse. This is what the vision is about. Even though John, we're not told that he sees them. This is what the vision is about. The angels are just there to help. What the vision is about is we've got to seal these 144,000 people. That's what the whole vision is about. And to do that, we need a period of calm. And to accomplish that, we need the 4 angels to hold the wind back. So I'm going to pick up with 3b, second half of that verse, next week.
The things that are impossible with man are possible with God. Through Jesus we shall do valiantly. The things that are impossible with man are possible with God. Through Jesus we shall do valiantly. This new way is a way of life as a disciple of Jesus my Lord. His Holy Spirit is abiding in me, and I am abiding in His Word. The things that are impossible with man are possible with God. Through Jesus we shall do valiantly. The things that are impossible with man are possible with God.